everyone, it's Hailey, and today is Bookmas Day 6, so I'm going to be talking about my favorite books that I read in 2020. I look forward to doing this video every year, but it also intimidates me so much because it's like, I don't know, it's just so hard to pick 10 books and then to count them down from my 10, which is still, I mean, it's not a least favorite, but out of these top 10, it would be my least favorite, and then to my absolute favorite book that I read this year. It's just so hard. Like, I feel like usually the top 5 pretty easy, but even this year that wasn't that easy, and the middle always gets muddled because I'm like, I don't know, like I feel like I like them all the same. Basically I have to make decisions and I'm not very good at that. I would be interested though if you guys want to try and guess my #1 favorite book of the year. I'm sure a lot of you guys will probably get it, but you guys can comment that down below, or if you wanted to guess my top 3 as well, or if you wanted to try and guess all 10, if you're up for the challenge. Please do let me know though what your favorite book of the year is as well, because I would love to know. So yesterday, just in case you missed it, for Bookmas Day 5, I talked about books that I mentioned on a lot of TBRs. I can't even remember what I literally just filmed. Honestly, where I'm at right now, but if you guys missed that, I will have it linked down below for you guys so you can check it out. And yeah, I think that was all I really wanted to say, and we'll get into the video. If you're hoping for more like overall reflection on my reading year, that will come in a later Bookmas video. I don't remember which day it is, but where I'm talking about like my every single book that I read in 2020, and then I'll go through some like reading stats and stuff like that. Today, we're just going to talk about the books that I loved the most. Also, actually, I did want to mention, I kind of later in the planning process came up with the idea of doing a video about my almost favorite books of the year. So like 4 stars or so, basically books that almost made it on this favorites list. I still really enjoyed them, but they're not quite favorites. So I'm really excited for that. That will be coming on Bookmas Day 13. I would like to do it closer to this video and my like worst books of the year, but I just came up with it too late and I didn't want to move everything around and shift everything down because I already have my announcement video, I already have all that planned out, so it would just be too complicated. So I'm sorry that it's so far in between, but Bookmas Day 13, I will be talking about those books. So now without further ado, let's get into this list. Hello, this is me from halfway through the video. I just realized that I actually have 12 books on this list, so my count is going to be off for half of the video, but I will amend it on the screen. I'm sorry. I wrote down the books, I guess, and can't count because counting to 10 is a real struggle. So here are my top 12 books of 2020. So coming in at number 10 is Kingdom of the Wicked by Kerri Maniscalco. This is the latest release from the author of Stalking Jack the Ripper, and I listened to the audiobook fairly recently actually, and the audiobook was amazing. It was so atmospheric. There was like music at points, like it was super cool. But this takes you to 1800s or so Italy, and you follow the main character Amelia, who she has a twin sister, Vittoria, and she ends up discovering that she has been brutally murdered. The two of them are witches, by the way. That is definitely worth mentioning, but witches, like, they're hidden. They have to keep themselves protected, so people don't know that they're witches. But she comes across Vittoria's body, which has been completely mutilated, so she sets to seeking vengeance and finding out what happened to her. And she ends up summoning a prince of hell, Wrath, who she has a steamy and angsty, a great romance with. The angst was amazing in this. That romance, oh my goodness, it was so great. It was a completely transportive and atmospheric read. I truly felt like I was alongside the characters and like in the settings that they were in. It just totally brought me there. And I loved the romance. The paranormal aspect to it was very interesting. I felt like the characters, even though they were pretty opposite, they were a great pairing, and they just had this super chemistry, but like there was so much like, this is kind of an enemies to lovers that I can really get behind because I understood the enemies portion of it. But the magic system was really interesting as well. I loved the witchcraft that came along with it, and also the setting of Italy was so cool. So food comes into this a lot. I love Italian food, but they are like talking about food quite a bit because her family actually owns a restaurant restaurant too. So that was awesome. And the family was prevalent to the story as well. So her grandmother, or Nona, is very prevalent to it too. Now, even though her twin sister has died, her sister plays a key role in the story as well, and I loved that sisterly bond and how it came through, despite the fact that Vittoria wasn't actually a character for the majority of the book because she has died. So I think overall this was just such a fantastically done enemies to lovers, angsty, paranormal romance. It was exactly what I was looking for. I love the way that Kerri Maniscalco writes romance. It's just so good, like so addictive, completely addictive, and I definitely can't wait for what's going to be next for this series because it was so great, and that's why it made its way onto this list. Coming in at number 9 is The King of Crows by Libba Bray. This is the long-awaited finale to the Diviners series. I can't believe it's over, but oh my goodness, was it a wild, such an enjoyable ride. So if you aren't familiar with this series, it's a 1920s ghost story, and you follow so many different characters, lots of different relationships, but it all comes together and is just so incredibly written and beautiful, and once again, a really addictive series, to be honest, because you're trying to like figure out what's happening, but you don't know what's what, and it keeps you questioning things, but I love that about it. So this one partially made its way onto this list because of nostalgia and just a pure love of the characters and the story, and that I've been with the series for so long, it feels like, but it's just, I can't believe it's over. I'm really sad about it. I loved the fact that this one had a kind of shake-up in the usual character pairings. That was really cool, and I loved how it tied up the loose ends. It just did such a great job of wrapping up this story, and it really kept me guessing, and I loved seeing these characters for one last time and being brought to that 1920s ghost-ridden New York was just, oh, it was so great. Really, just truly such a great series. If you haven't started it yet, definitely do. Oh, I just love her writing. She is a fantastic writer, and I really am eager to see what she's gonna come out with next. By the way, I mention this all the time, but I know for some it might seem really early to be doing a top books of the year video because there is still like the whole month of December left, but for me, because of filming for Bookmas, my reading year ends like mid-November. So anything that I read from like this point on, I will include towards next year and next year's reading goal for Goodreads and next year's Bookmas videos and all that. Next, my 8th favorite book of the year is One Day in December by Josie. This one was such a surprise because I really didn't expect to enjoy it as much as I did. So like I said, since my reading year ends at November, this I actually read last year in December, but I had such a blast reading it. It super surprised me. So this is a missed connections romance where the main character sees her love interest through a window of a bus, and then she doesn't see him again, but she fell in love with him at first sight. But then she does end up actually seeing him again because her best friend introduces him as her new boyfriend. So obviously that is definitely going to complicate things. So this book is set over the course of 10 years, and you follow these characters as it's like, there's so much going on between the two of them, let me tell you. This will they, won't they sort of thing kept me entirely intrigued and invested, and the characters were so well built up that I was just feeling their chemistry. It just like permeated throughout the book. It was just wild, and I like wanted it to happen, but I also didn't, and it was just, I was reeling, really. So this book was such a mixed bag of emotions, but I think having such a long time period really made me care for the characters and feel like I knew them, and just transported me to England. And like, I loved the fact that there were like certain days that were really like certain holidays and stuff that came up every year, so you could see how they progressed, and just following their journey individually but also together. It was just this book was so much, but it was really, really enjoyable. Next is my 7th favorite book of the year, which is The Fountains of Silence by Ruta Sepetys. I read this book after like everything happened with the pandemic. Everything started happening, and then I didn't read for a very long time, and then on a whim I ended up picking up this book, and I just instantly fell in love with it. For some reason, it just totally like took my breath away from the very beginning. I love Ruta Sepetys' writing. I have have read many of her books. I think the only one I haven't read yet is Out of the Easy, I think is what it's called. But this one is set in the 1950s in Spain, which is living under a fascist dictatorship. So you follow two characters. One of them is living in Spain. She's working at this hotel. And then the other character is coming to Spain. He's American and he's visiting and he's learning more about the Spain of his mother's heritage and he's taking pictures of everything. But the Spain that he's seeing is very different than the Spain that the girl Anna, who is working at the hotel, is experiencing. They are still reeling from the Spanish Civil War and things just aren't great. So you see him as he's learning more about what Spain truly is, as he's trying to figure out what is actually happening here, and as he's bonding with Anna. They come to have a relationship because she's actually the housekeeper in the hotel room that he's staying at. And there is such a contrast between the two of them, but it's very educational, but it doesn't feel like you're being educated. I learned so much though, and so many like scary things that happened that I had never heard about before, but you get tiny pieces. There's like lots of different storylines coming and you're kind of like, I'm not sure where the storyline is going, but it all comes together so beautifully. It's really well crafted and truly transports you to Spain at that time period. It does a great job of bringing it to life. It's just a super powerful and heartbreaking story, and I loved the fact that it was talking about a time period and a historical moment that I had never really heard about before. So I was able to learn a lot reading it, but also became entirely invested in all of the characters. You get to see both of those main characters' families, and you become just totally engrossed in everything that's happening with them and around them, and you have so many questions and you're wondering if you're going to get the answers, but it's just like a puzzle that ends up coming together, and it is so good. Next up is The House of Salt and Sorrows by Erin A. Craig. This one's another kind of surprise. So this is the 6th book, I think. Is that where we're at? Yes, that is where we're at. So this is kind of the first fantasy book that I had read all year. Actually, it is the first fantasy book that I read all year. I mean, apart from one, but we'll talk about that one in my worst books of 2020 video. But anyways, this one was such a win for me. So this is a 12 Dancing Princesses retelling, but it is a horror twist on it. So the main character, she has all these sisters, but so many of them have died. They keep on dying, and she is like, there has to be something wrong here. She feels that the family's cursed, and she's trying to figure out what is happening. But you, the reader, are also trying to figure out what's happening, because you don't know what's up, what's down, there is just a lot. But it's all so well done. Truly such an atmospheric book. I could not read this at night. It totally creeped me out. There were certain scenes that I was like, oh my goodness, but it truly just sucked me in from the very beginning. I just totally was brought to this manor by the sea. I was brought into Annalee's life and wondering what happened to her sisters. I was questioning things alongside her and I just wanted answers. So I just kept on, it was a real page turner, but I loved the there's nautical or sea elements to it as well, which was super cool. It was just a mix of a bunch of different things that I wasn't sure if they would work, but they really did, and the payoff was great. My 5th favorite book of the year is Cemetery Boys by Aiden Thomas. The chances are you have probably heard of this book before. It has gotten a lot of hype, but it is all so well deserved. So you follow the main character, Yadriel, who is a transgender boy who is determined to prove his gender to his conservative Latinx family. Now, in doing so, he ends up summoning a ghost of the recently deceased school bad boy, but he refuses to leave, so he is stuck with this ghost to let him do the final things that he wants to do before he will go to his final resting place. This is a very Halloween-y read just because it deals with death. You have ghosts there, and it also just is mostly the cemetery is the setting for it, so everything about it is Halloween-y, but you could read it any time of year because it is just such a beautiful, heartbreaking, just wild ride of a story. I became so invested in all of the characters and their stories and their experiences, and Yadriel was such a pleasure to read about, and I really felt for him at so many points and all the struggles that he was facing. But Julian was also just the perfect counterpart to him. I loved the relationship that ended up developing between the two of them, but it also just absolutely broke my heart into a million pieces at so many points in the story. I loved that family was really prevalent in it, and like I said, that setting, it's once again a super atmospheric book. Apparently that's just the buzzword for this year, is just atmospheric reads, but this book managed to have so many layers to it, which is another thing that I really love when books do, and it had so many happy moments, so many sad moments, but also just like everything about it totally had my heart, and this book is entirely worth that hype. It is at this point that I realized my count is off and I have 12 books total. So moving on, next is my 6th favorite book of the year, and that is Claphorny Land by Elizabeth Acevedo. This is a story written in verse. I actually have written quite a few of those, no, not written, read quite a few of those this year and have had such luck with them. Really enjoyed them. This is the 3rd book of Elizabeth Acevedo's that I have read. I think she only has 3 out, but I definitely am a huge fan of her writing, and this story was no exception. So you follow 2 sisters who don't know that the other exists. One lives in the Dominican Republic and the other one lives in New York City, and they find out about each other when their father dies in a plane crash. So obviously that is a very interesting way to find out that you have a sister, and both of these characters you get to know so well in their dual perspectives. You get to see their very interesting relationship develop. I loved the topic of sisterhood, grief. This just hit so many different emotions and had me very invested once again in the storyline of these characters, and I thought it was so interesting seeing them both come from very different worlds but finally come to meet after just finding out about each other. And it just is a story that like is very hard to read, but also such a powerful and poignant narrative. Like, it deals with grief very, very well, and I totally would recommend it. Now, my 5th favorite book of the year is The Black Flamingo by Dean Atta. Once again, a novel in verse, so that just seems to be a theme for me this year. But in this book, you follow Michael, and you follow him from a very young age to university. So you get to see him develop and discover his identity as a biracial gay man. And you kind of see him going through like a Goldilocks sort of thing where he's trying on different things to see what fits him and where he belongs. So I think this is a story entirely about belonging and self-discovery. It's kind of like a drag queen origin story as well, because he finds drag and discovers that that is something that he loves and enjoys so, so much. And I just fell in love with Michael and became entirely invested in his story. And I just wanted to like take him by the hand and help him find the place where he felt like he was at home and felt like he belonged the most as he went through so many things over the course of this book. The writing of this was so beautiful. The poems were fantastic, and I had such a pleasure with, I actually read this twice to be honest, because I read this one and then I also got the UK ebook because there's some illustrations thrown in there that I wanted to see. So the first time I actually listened to the audio, because I do like to do that for poetry. Usually the author will read it and I find it just brings the story to life. And I had a blast with reading this both times, both methods that I decided to read it. And I totally think that like if you are struggling, you don't know where you belong, and you're struggling with really anything, like this book deals a lot with sexuality and gender identity and those things, but also just where you belong as a person overall. I think that this is a book that anyone could relate to. Now, my 4th favorite book of this year is Beach Read by Emily Henry. This is a book that I finished and I really liked it. I was like, that was a great book, but then I keep on thinking about it, which is why it's found its way up in this list. So this is an adult romance, but it's more substance than that. Not that like adult romances I'm saying are like, oh, whatever, but this is more of a powerful adult romance. It has more of an emotional level to it, which I love. I love romances, but I also love when there's a little bit extra thrown in there. So in this book, we follow January and Augustus. And January, her father has recently died. She's a romance writer, and she discovers following her father's death that he wasn't exactly the person that she thought he was, which is a really hard discovery to make. She is struggling with writer's block, and her agent is expecting a new book. Now, she meets Augustus, who she actually knows from college, but they end up in neighboring cabins in this Michigan coastal town, and he is a writer as well, but he writes literary fiction, so they always kind of had a rivalry in college that only she knew about, but they decide to switch what they are writing for the summer. So she is going to try and write the next great American novel, and he is going to to try and write a romance. I loved how craft came into this story. I loved hearing more about her writing process as she's trying to get out of this writer's slump. I almost said reading slump, but like, you know what I mean? Kind of the same thing. And I love to see her develop as a character, and also their relationship was just chef's kiss. It was like second chance romance, enemies to lovers, but very, very light, because it's more so like she just has this rivalry, so I thought it was kind of fun. Like, he didn't really know about it and he's like, what? But the fact that it was pre-established like long term because it was a college rivalry that she had, that made me completely okay with it. Now, the emotions that this book hit on both levels, because not even just on her side, he also has an emotional plot line too. It just all blended together and made me like, I don't know, I was just so invested in everything. I feel like I have said that so many times. I'm invested. But that's what matters. Like, if I'm invested in the characters, then a book is going to make its way higher on this list. So I truly did become invested in these characters and them coming together and seeing them develop individually as writers and seeing them develop as a romance. It was just so beautiful. Like, I truly fell in love with this story. I thought my expectations were a little high going into it because this one also has been really hyped up, and I think that's why when I first finished it I was like, oh, I don't know if it was as good as I thought, but no, like, it really, I did love this book, honestly, truly. Now, my second favorite book of the year is Felix Ever After by Kacen Callender. In this book, you follow Felix, who is a transgender boy who is dealing with some transphobic bullying at school, so definitely a trigger warning for that. But someone reveals his dead name and pictures of him before his transition at his school, and he is trying to figure out who did this. But in the process of trying to do that, he ends up in a quasi-love triangle that he really wasn't expecting to be in, because he's never been in love. He really wants to, but it's never happened for him. So this love triangle is new. When I talk about a book that hits a lot of emotional levels, this is like the definition of that. You follow Felix as he is dealing with a lot of struggles of trying to figure out who he is, his identity, similarly to the Black Flamingo, but he's on this journey of self-discovery, but also at the same time on this romantic journey that he really wasn't expecting. You have so many fun and funny moments, but also so many moments that you feel like your heart is just being like broken into a million pieces, but then it gets put back together again. Like, there is every single emotion in here. It was a lot of fun, but it also just really hit me as such a beautiful, beautiful story. I loved watching the relationship develop here. It was just so lovely to watch. I felt like they were the perfect pairing, and I just had such an amazing time reading this. I loved seeing the representation and learning more about the main character, and following his journey of self-discovery was just such a pleasure. This book is also set at an art school, which was really cool, and I didn't know that going into it, so art came into it a lot, and I love the fact that self-portraits were also such a main topic, because I thought that was very clever as he's trying to figure out who he is and also trying to make this self-portrait. It like goes hand in hand. But lovely relationships in this book overall, like the friends and the family relationship. It was great to watch those develop over the course of the story, and just the character development too. It was just so great. Oh, totally touches my heart. You should read this book if you haven't yet. Like, honestly, I promise it's worth the hype. Wait, I can't count again. That was my third book of the year. Oh my gosh, why do I struggle so much? Okay, so that was number 3. I don't know why I'm struggling so much. So now at number 2, we have The Wolf by Wolf duology by Ryan Graudin. I'm sorry, I don't know why I can't count. It is such a struggle for me. But I wanted to include both of these books because obviously I read the first book first, but when I read Blood for Blood, I loved it even more than the first book. So you've probably heard me talk about these books because I have quite a bit, and I always find it hard to describe the concept because it doesn't sound like, it sounds so weird, and I don't know, it doesn't, like, the concept kind of pulls me in, but I'm also like, it seems weird. So you follow a main character. It's an alternate history, first of all. World War II was won by the Axis powers, so Hitler is in power, and obviously that is very, very, very not good. but you follow the main character who escaped from one of the camps, and she now has the ability to skin shift because she was experimented upon. So she is using that ability to skin shift into one of the winners of this annual motorcycle race, where the winner of this motorcycle race gets to meet Hitler. So she wants to win so she can kill Hitler. It's a lot. It's an interesting concept. So I don't know, like, this story just kept me on the edge of my seat. I had no clue what was going to happen in the end. I had no clue where I was going to go in the first book and even in the second book. But oh my goodness, there are like, the stakes are so high. So it completely like transports you to this gritty landscape of a world where the Axis powers won. And I think it has a lot of good commentary thrown in there as well. But I just was totally amazed by the turns that the story took, by the way the resistant movement was going, and the fact that there were like so many characters and they all came together and like just they all are risking their lives. Like our main character that you're following is risking her life in the biggest way possible, and you don't know what's gonna happen. You don't know because the stakes are so high. So it was just like an edge of my seat, unexpected read, to be honest. I really didn't know what was going to happen going into it. But as much as I loved the first book, I loved the sequel even more. And oh my goodness, these books were just so great. And finally, coming in at my #1 book of the year, I know I didn't mess up the count here. I have caught up. I'm so sorry that that count was such a struggle, but I will have it on the screen so that it's not so difficult. But you probably guessed my favorite book that I read this year. That was Lovely War by Julie Berry. Historical fiction and I just had a great time this year. So this is a World War I historical fiction that is narrated by the Greek gods, Aphrodite specifically, the god of war as well, Apollo. You just have everyone chiming in here as they're narrating these two love stories. First you have Hazel and James, who meet just before James is about to go to the front, and they fall in love immediately, but obviously that's really bad timing for that. And then you follow Aubrey and Colette. Aubrey is a gifted musician, and he is also a member of the All African American Regiment, and then Colette is a Belgian girl who he ends up falling in love with. So both of these romances are kind of doomed from the start. You know it's going to be a difficult read. You know, like, chances are at that time period it's not going to end well, but like you couldn't help but falling in love with these characters and with their love stories. Also, the unique concept of having it narrated by the gods was such an amazing addition and so incredibly well done. I just loved this book, like truly I did. I feel like a lot of, actually now that I'm thinking about it, my favorite books of the year have been historical fiction. Like The Nightingale, I don't think that was last year. I can't remember what my favorite book of the year was last year. Was it The Nightingale? I can't remember, but the point is, I just love historical fiction when it's done really well, and this one was done exceptionally well. It hits so many different points that are happening during the war. Also, World War I, you don't read about that much. It's usually World War II, but you got to see so many different sides of it. I liked the fact that it wasn't just all white characters, which was so lovely and refreshing. And also, each romance stood individually, but the stories also came together. So like everything was just really expertly woven into this beautiful story that I know that I will read again, because I had so, like, I don't want to say a good time reading it, because I mean it's not always a good time, but I just completely lost myself in it, which is exactly what I want from a book. So I know I've talked about this book a lot, but I hope that it has convinced you guys, if you like historical fiction, to check it out, because I think it's a very unique one, and it was just, it's so beautiful. I want to read more of her stuff soon. But oh my goodness, definitely my favorite book of the year. So that is all for Bookmas Day 6, my top 12 books of 2020. Yikes, counting is a struggle, but I hope you guys enjoyed. I don't know if you guys guessed correctly, but I feel like a lot of you probably did guess my favorite book of the year. Like, I have not been quiet about that. At least the top 2. I mean, even the 3. I feel like I haven't been quiet about any of these books, but when am I ever when I love a book? But like I said, please do let me know what your absolute favorite book of 2020 is. I would love to know. I hope you had a good reading year as well. Your reading year probably isn't over yet, but let me know what your favorite book is so far, at least. But don't miss tomorrow, which is Bookmas Day 7, where it is a reading vlog. So I'm going to be reading the 2 books that I included on my TBRs the most this year from Bookmas Day 5. Was that day 5? Yeah, from yesterday's Bookmas video, I'm going to be reading 2 of those books, so don't miss that. But don't forget to subscribe because I will be putting out a new video every single day for the month of December, so you don't want to miss any of those. So also click that notification bell so you'll be notified whenever the new videos go up. So thank you so much for watching, and I will see you tomorrow for Bookmas Day 7. Bye!